The quality is so much better than I expected. It feels like something way more expensive. Honestly, it's kind of a steal. Show support to Nubian narrator and cop some merch before it's sold out again.
There's something about them where I just look at them and I think, something happened to you when you were a child. I felt this way spiritually when I looked at Astrid Tumenez. I can't explain it. I looked at Astrid Tumenez just doing an interview and I was just like, childhood trauma, question mark? I don't know. But I'm putting it out there. And we'll find out if I'm right by how much they freak out and pay people to make videos going, oh, it's so crazy that Candace is suggesting. When they start paying for that campaign, that propaganda campaign, we can then go ahead and take what I say to the bank.
Let's get something straight before anyone reaches for the comment section like it's a sword. This is not a rant. This is not vibes. This is not I feel like. This is a structured argument using the internal logic of the belief system Candace Owens claims to represent. We are going to do three things today. Define a distinction the Bible itself quietly but clearly makes. Apply that distinction to Candace's recent claims about supernatural perception. Anticipate the rebuttals before they're typed. And we're going to do it with precision. The distinction is this: institutional prophets versus situational prophetesses, throne prophets versus side-character prophetesses, office-holding prophets versus gift-expressing prophetesses. Those are not insults. Those are analytical categories, and once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. The core distinction, the Bible never admits out loud, but always enforces. Yes, the Bible names a handful of women as prophetesses. That is factual, that is textual, that is not the debate. The debate is about what kind of prophets they were allowed to be. Because when you actually examine the structure of biblical authority, you see something consistent and unavoidable. Every prophet who holds institutional authority is male. Every prophet who leads nations is male. Every prophet who writes doctrine-defining scripture is male. Every prophet who confronts kings as the supreme mouthpiece of God is male. Every prophet whose authority shapes theology is male. That is not opinion, that is pattern. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Moses, Elijah, Elisha, Samuel, Nathan, Hosea, Amos, Micah, Malachi. These are not people who occasionally spoke spiritually. These are office-holding prophets. These are institutional prophets. These are throne prophets. They are not merely expressive. They are authoritative. They stand before kings. They issue judgment. They speak law. They define doctrine. They claim direct appointment by God. They are not questioned by the people. They answer only to God. That is the prophetic office. Now look at the women labelled prophetesses. Miriam sings. Deborah judges in a specific crisis moment. Huldah delivers a message when consulted. Anna speaks in the temple. Philip's daughters prophesy in Acts. Notice what is missing. None of them lead the religious system. None of them establish doctrine. None of them write books of scripture. None of them command kings. None of them become the supreme voice of God over the nation. None of them hold ongoing institutional authority. They speak in moments. They appear in scenes. They deliver messages. They function episodically. They are situational prophetesses. They are gift-expressing prophetesses. They are side-character prophetesses within a larger male-led narrative. That is not misogyny imposed by me. That is structure embedded in the text. Why this distinction matters for Candace Owens. Because Candace is not merely saying, I sometimes feel intuitive about people. She is presenting herself as someone with special perceptive authority, someone who can see hidden things, someone whose internal experiences carry epistemic weight, someone whose perception should be taken seriously as insight, not speculation. That is not casual speech. That is not harmless phrasing. That is positioning. She is edging toward the posture of an office-holding prophet, without the theology, without the validation, without the framework, without the accountability. In biblical terms, she is not acting like a situational prophetess delivering a message when consulted. She is positioning herself closer to the institutional prophet archetype. The problem is not gender. The problem is role mismatch. Biblically speaking, prophetic authority is not self-declared. It is not discovered internally. It is not validated by vibes. It is not confirmed by platform. It is externally recognized, communally affirmed, doctrinally consistent, and subjected to collective accountability. Candace's claims about being able to look at people and know their trauma, about prophetic dreams involving death, about metaphysical interpretations of others, do not follow that pattern. They follow the pattern of self-appointed mystical authority. And inside the Bible's own framework, that category is not celebrated. It is warned against. Anticipating the first objection, but Deborah led Israel. Yes, Deborah judged Israel during a crisis. And even that story subtly reinforces the patriarchal structure. In Judges 4, Deborah tells Barak to go lead the battle. He hesitates. The narrative frames this hesitation as failure. The victory goes to a woman, Jael, but not as a structural endorsement of female authority. It's framed as humiliation for the man. The text does not go on to establish a tradition of female leadership. Deborah does not write scripture. She does not establish doctrine. She does not become a recurring institutional model. She is a situational exception, not a structural overturning. An exception proves the rule. It does not erase it. Anticipating the second objection, but Philip's daughters prophesied. Yes, they prophesied. They did not lead churches. They did not write epistles. They did not establish doctrine. They did not correct apostles. They did not function as institutional authorities. They exercised a gift. They did not hold office. That distinction matters. Gift-expressing prophetesses are allowed to speak. Office-holding prophets are allowed to govern. Those are not the same category of authority. Anticipating the third objection, you're just being misogynistic. No. The text is misogynistic. The analysis is descriptive. I am not arguing what should be. I am describing what is. The Bible repeatedly establishes man as head of woman. Woman as forbidden to teach or exercise authority over man. Woman as instructed to be silent in church contexts. Male priesthood. Male apostles. Male lineage as theological priority. This is not controversial scholarship, this is basic textual observation. If someone wants to argue that the Bible is not patriarchal, they are not defending Candace. They are rewriting scripture. Candace's position creates a theological problem. Candace wants the authority of intuition, the authority of spiritual insight, the authority of personal revelation, the authority of interpretive dominance. But she also wants to root her worldview in a text that explicitly denies women structural spiritual authority. That contradiction cannot be resolved without either abandoning biblical patriarchy or abandoning her claims to special insight. You cannot keep both. If she affirms biblical structure, she must accept that her role is not to function as a self-asserting spiritual authority. If she asserts spiritual authority, she must accept that she is departing from biblical structure. There is no third path that preserves coherence. This is why her claims land differently. When a male pastor claims prophetic authority in conservative spaces, his audience accepts it because the tradition supports male authority. When Candace edges toward prophetic framing, she is violating the very hierarchy her ideology defends. That is why this feels unstable. That is why the rhetoric feels inconsistent. That is why the reaction is so sharp. It is not because she is a woman. It is because she is occupying a role her own theology structurally denies her. Anticipating the defensive pivot, you're taking her too literally. Then why use prophetic language? If her claims are metaphorical, she needs to clarify that. If her claims are psychological, she needs to ground them empirically. If her claims are rhetorical, she needs to stop framing them as spiritual. Because once you invoke dreams, prophecy, supernatural insight, and hidden perception, you have entered theological territory, whether you intended to or not. You do not get to toggle between this is serious spiritual insight and it's just how I talk, depending on criticism. Either words mean things or they don't. The deeper issue, self-mythologizing. What we are actually watching is not theology, it is narrative psychology. When someone spends too long in an environment where every thought gets validated, every take gets rewarded, every statement gets amplified, every internal impulse becomes content, they begin to blur the line between internal experience and external authority. Dreams feel meaningful, hunches feel revelatory, intuition feels prophetic, self-concept expands into destiny. That is not uncommon in influencer ecosystems, but when combined with religious rhetoric, it becomes dangerous, because it shifts from "I have opinions" to "I have insight others lack" to "you should trust my perception." That is how epistemic authority is constructed without accountability. And inside the Bible's own logic, that is precisely the category that false prophets occupy. This is not, there are no prophetesses. This is, there is a structural distinction between prophetic gift and prophetic office, and Candace's behavior resembles self-appointment to an office the text does not support. That argument does not collapse under Deborah. It does not collapse under Miriam. It does not collapse under Philip's daughters, because those examples reinforce the distinction. They spoke. They did not rule. Candace is not presenting herself as someone who merely speaks. She is presenting herself as someone whose insight should carry authority. That is the difference. The final question. So we end here with the real question her audience should be asking. If you believe in a text that establishes male headship, male spiritual authority, and male institutional prophecy, on what theological basis are you claiming exceptional spiritual perception? Not rhetorically, not sarcastically, structurally. But where is the framework? Where is the communal validation? Where is the doctrinal consistency? Where is the accountability? Because the Bible does not celebrate self-appointed insight. It warns against it. And the deeper irony is this. The very people who reject intuition, psychology, emotional literacy, and internal exploration as soft or unreliable are now being asked to trust someone's inner experiences as meaningful revelation. That is not conservative epistemology. That is mysticism wearing a blazer. This is not an attack on a person. This is a critique of inconsistency. If someone builds their platform on a worldview, they are accountable to that worldview's logic. If someone invokes theology, they must be prepared to be evaluated theologically. If someone claims special insight, they must explain the authority behind that claim. The distinction stands. Institutional prophets held office. Situational prophetesses spoke in moments. Office-holding prophets governed doctrine. Gift-expressing prophetesses delivered isolated messages. Throne prophets shaped nations. Side-character prophetesses appeared within stories. Candace's current posture resembles the authority of the former, while her theology confines her to the latter. That contradiction is not a smear. It is structural. It is textual. It is unavoidable. And once you see it, the performance stops working. Not because she is wrong, but because the framework she claims to represent no longer supports the role she is trying to occupy.